much for joining, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here, and I know this is a bit of a hot topic, isn't it? There's quite a lot going on with it, and I have had a surplus of information to try and put into this presentation for you today. So I'm going to go through it. I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you along the way. Going to try and share some case studies and that sort of thing. We do have some time at the end for Q&A, so keep those coming in as we go on the way through, and we'll pick them up after. And of course, reach out to me directly if there's anything at all that I can help with. Always happy to share a few thoughts. So today's agenda, and you'll notice that a lot of it is illustrated by generative AI tools, like this one down in the bottom left. We're talking about how to use generative AI for business growth and career advancements, right? So we're trying to think about marketing strategies, but we also want to have a look at what it means for you as an individual, as potentially an employee, as someone working for yourself. How do you get the most out of this technology that everyone is talking about? There's an awful lot of hype about it, which can make us recoil, I think, sometimes, and maybe just try and forget about it. It's overhyped, like most of these things, but there's a lot of substance there too. So the way that I want to discuss this topic with you is begin with the basics. What is generative AI? I am absolutely certain that you have a pretty good idea of that by now, but I want to get to the hearts of that actually, to figure out what it is and crucially what it's not. And that's where a lot of people you might have seen talking on LinkedIn or on Twitter have moved into this area where we're no longer talking about the technology itself. We're thinking about what we might like it to be. Second, an overview of ChatGPT. I'm going to talk about different models, different applications. I've actually included a list of definitions at the end of this as well, just for key terms and concepts that you'll hear mentioned time and time again. We'll look at ChatGPT as one example that can illuminate what's going on in the wider industry, but it's not the only one. Third, marketing applications. I want to try and get a little more specific here. So we'll start with that kind of panoramic view. Then we'll zone in a little bit more and talk about specific ways that you can use it for marketing. Also, some questions to ask yourself when you're doing that. Just because you can do all these things now doesn't always mean you should. Fourth, we'll look at the impact of AI on the job market. I'm going to reflect a little bit on the way that this could disrupt different industries. Of course, I also want to think about education, or the UCD Professional Academy talking to you here. So we're going to have a little bit of reflection on that as well. And I'm sure you'll have some thoughts too. The penultimate section, we'll just look at the skills for the AI era. What is this technology really good at? And where does it surpass what we can do even already? You know, there are some things that it is simply better at than us. And that can be an advantage if we don't fight it and we move into other areas. So I'll talk about the skills that you and I should be focusing on. And Q&A at the end. So keep the questions coming in the whole way through. We'll be happy to take those at the end and afterwards, reach out. So let's get moving. Another generative AI image here, a sort of robot Shakespeare. It took me a while to get the prompt right to get that one. So I'm going to ask you a question. Just let me know in the chat and I can watch all the numbers fly past and get a straw poll here. How familiar are you with generative AI? So number one would be, I'm using ChatGPT every day. It's part of my working life. Two, I've tried a few of the tools, maybe DALL-E, maybe Stable Diffusion. Haven't tried them too much, but I know what they are. Third, heard of them, but never used. And fourth, actually, I don't even really know what you're talking about, but I hope you're going to explain. Chat's disabled. Yeah, good point, Neve. Good point, Neve. But you've improvised. The AI wouldn't have been able to do that, Neve. The AI just would have said, not working. All right, we've actually got quite a lot of ones coming through, which is really interesting. You're probably a bit closer to me then. A few threes, though. Heard of these tools, but never really used them. Two, yeah, tried a few of the tools. All right, as a bit of a straw poll, we haven't got too many fours, I'll say that. Everyone is aware that this is going on. Yeah, apologies, the chat thing is closed, but thanks, Neve and Diane, for letting me know, because otherwise I would have been sitting looking at a blank box thinking no one wanted to answer me. So thank you. So our range actually runs from 1 to 3. I'd say a mean average is probably somewhere between the 1 and 2, isn't it? And quite a lot of people using this tech every single day already. And it's getting better every single week, as you might be noticing. So a few numbers just to give you a sense of this. 100 million ChatGPT users within 2 months. That's the fastest that any app has got to that number. It's way faster than the likes of Instagram or TikTok or anything else like that. The creators of ChatGPT were blown away by that. They just didn't expect it. It had 1 million users within 2 days, and it was a little bit of a quiet launch. Gartner is predicting that 30% of outbound messages from businesses will be written completely by AI by 2025. I always love these sort of predictions. They're a little bit vague into the future, a little bit, but that might be quite conservative once we get closer to that point. I think people are already drafting a lot of emails using generative AI. And the market size is expected to be, just on its own for this technology, $110 billion by the end of the decade, from pretty much nothing last year. I can talk a lot about the fancy theory here, but these tools can be quite fun. I've certainly had my fun. I think I did this one the day after the Crufts final because the dog I wanted to win didn't win, and I wanted to see what that might have looked like. So an oil painting of a Bichon Frise winning Crufts in a leather jacket, which the real one didn't have, and celebrating the victory with champagne. This is how it should have been at Crufts 2023. Anything you can think of, you can pop it in there. I'll give you a link to this tool as well if you haven't used this one, and it will come up with some sort of an approximation. It's pretty good. You wouldn't use them as marketing images or anything like that, but they're a decent attempt. At the bottom, Google has a good visualization to help you understand how this works. So they call this a diffusion model. It was created for audio first, and then they realized a few years ago that this could apply really well to images. And what it does is it takes lots of images like this lovely little dog here, and then noise is introduced. So you can see the noise visually here being introduced until it's pure noise. So there's nothing recognizable about the original set of pixels. Then it is built back up slowly. So they are trained to map the data back to the noise back to the data. And what it means is it's able to merge different types of images because the model is trained on so many different ones that it's able to know the concept of an oil painting, knows what a Bichon Frise is, knows what Crufts is even, that it's a competition, it's wearing a leather jacket. It's seen some of those before. So it's starting from this process and building back up to an image and mapping different ideas. And this is why you get imperfections in it, because it is starting from that point and trying to build something cohesive by the end of it. But anyway, I could talk about the technical stuff all day, but I want to get into this. Here, we're looking at a VC firm, Sequoia Capital, and they tried to come up with an idea of where this industry is going to go in the next few years and where we should be placing our bets, essentially. So you can see on the left-hand side, it's looking at text, code, images, and video 3D gaming, and increasing in terms of complexity. Text and code, you could maybe switch over. Code is obviously text-based mainly, but the complexity is increasing as you move down the left-hand side. Across the top, we see the different dates. This was created at the very end of 2022. So they're guessing a little bit what will happen in 2023. For text, it sees scientific papers being created using AI. No real human input there, at least in terms of creating the content. Code getting much more effective. Then we move down and we see images, we see video, 3D and gaming. These will be almost there. Now, I don't know that we'll see mock-ups for architecture in generative AI by the end of the year, but you never know. The reason I want to show you this is two things, really. First is that when we talk about generative AI, there are different models and different types of content that are produced to different degrees of reliability. So there are reasons that they're much more complex than each other, but in reality, text is the most advanced along with code. Those two kind of go hand in hand. The other reason I want to show this to you is it tells us a lot about people and how we imagine the future. We like to draw a very straight line. So we say, today it's good at this, tomorrow it will continue to be good at that, and it will be better to this rate of acceleration. That's not really how change tends to happen as we experience it ourselves. People are messy, people react against things as well as working with them. I don't know that we'll see final drafts of architectural designs done completely by generative AI. Would you feel comfortable putting up a building based on that without having a human expert involved, even if it was good enough? It's like having a pilot in a plane. The planes can fly themselves, but we like to have a pilot sitting there, just in case. So we're at the peak, I think, of the hype. I think even as the technology gets better, we're going to be more realistic about what it's capable of and what it's not. The early stage, it's hysteria, really. So in the past year, the NBC says generative AI has gotten so much better that it's inspired people to leave their jobs, start new companies, and dream about a future where artificial intelligence could power a new generation of tech giants. And this is something I've been pondering myself in my work, thinking, are we at not necessarily as seismic a moment as this, but something akin to the internet coming along or the advent of publicly available electricity, where it's something that becomes embedded in things. So the likes of Google, by just adding a chatbot onto their existing search engine, they might as well have a horse and carriage and try and just put a GPS system on top of it. It's not built for that age. So that's what a lot of us are trying to figure out at the moment. And a lot of people are betting that that's just how big this is going to be. I've created a few little tools. I'll share links to these things with you. They're not commercial things. I've just done it for a bit of fun. I made this chatbot. I thought, we're going to try and define generative AI. So why not get my chatbot to try and help us? And one of the things that I've asked this chatbot to do is to speak in analogies. I'm quite weak at coming up with those, so I've found that this helps me quite a bit when trying to explain ideas. So generative AI, what is it? What have I been talking about for the last 10, 15 minutes? It's a type of artificial intelligence that creates something new rather than just recognizing or analyzing existing information. It works by using algorithms to generate new data, generate, right? Such as images, videos, or text. Think of it like a chef who creates a new dish from existing ingredients. The chef combines the ingredients in new ways to create something that is brand new. In the same way, generative AI takes existing data and combines it in new ways to create something brand new. I think this is really key, and I think we've missed it quite a lot. Because what we're seeing is new, we think the process or anything behind it must be radically new. That it's, I mean, I suppose that's what creativity is, isn't it? Taking two existing things and combining them in a new way. And that's essentially what it is doing. But it is key to remember that, isn't it? It's creating something that looks a lot like something you've seen before, but it's just not quite identical. And GPT-4, the latest model, it has come out. So I was having a little chat with it, and it says, keep in mind that the quality of the response, that is the response it gives me, will depend on the accuracy and detail of your description. So there is a premium on precision, on knowing exactly what you want it to do. And to do that, I think you need to have domain expertise. You actually probably need to know more than the model does about the subject that you're thinking about. What it's going to help you do is structure your thoughts and maybe expand on them, give you a counter argument against them, but it's not going to magically come up with something amazing that no person could ever have thought of. Its inspiration is exactly what we've done before. So I've heard people say that it's just holding up a mirror to humanity, and I think I went along with that analogy in some of my research at the beginning. But it's more like one of those, if you remember them, funhouse ones that makes you look a bit wacky. You're recognizably yourself. That's really what it's doing to humanity. It's reflecting back at us the corpus of human knowledge in a slightly distorted way that is enough to make it new, to make it plausible to us, to make us believe that it could be real, but it is still reflecting that core of human knowledge. Which is why I find it bizarre to see these sorts of things, because it belies an understanding of how ChatGPT and similar systems work. So New York Times, this ended up going really viral. I saw it everywhere. It had over 1 million likes on Instagram. an author said, in a 2-hour conversation, Microsoft's new chatbot said it would like to be human, had a desire to be destructive, and was in love with the person it was chatting with. Here's the transcript. And it's a form of digital navel gazing, isn't it? It's people so enthralled to their own intelligence and their own understanding of the world and their own sense of uniqueness that they want to hear back from a robot that it wants to be like them. But I was watching a movie the other week, and I don't often go down the movie well for academic lectures, but I was watching, sorry, I jumped one. I was watching that movie Memento the other week, and this really stood out to me. So this guy, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure most of you have. I hadn't actually seen it until the other day, or maybe I'd forgotten seeing it, fittingly enough. Short-term memory loss, trying to figure out what happened to his wife. And he's thinking about this other person that he saw before the accident happened that made him lose his memory. And he's thinking about that guy and whether he had the same condition that he has. And he realizes something towards the end. He says, if you think you're supposed to recognize somebody, you just pretend. You bluff it to get a pat on the head from the doctors. You bluff it to seem less like a freak. People are easily taken in by that sort of thing. So he realized this guy actually had memory loss. He couldn't remember the people that he was meeting, but he knew enough to know that they wanted to feel recognized. So he pretended to recognize them. You know, that's exactly what AI is doing to us as the people prompting it. You can tell these systems, even GPT-4, 2 + 2 = 5, and it will then say, oh, sorry, I told you it was 4. You're correct, it's 5. That example is really clear and really obvious to us. It's less obvious when we ask it for lesser known reasons that World War I started for an academic essay, and it comes up with something that isn't actually true, but we don't know enough to correct it. But what it's trying to do is please us, to satisfy the user prompt. So one of my big things today that I really would hope to leave you with as we get to the end of this session is, instead of asking the question a lot of people are asking, is how can generative AI help me do what I do, but cheaper and faster? You know, I create blog posts, it can create blog posts for me, is the logic that a lot of businesses are coming up with. But the people who really succeed with this technology will instead ask, how can I rethink what I do to achieve more in collaboration with this technology? This is the only time in history that it has existed. If you were to start a game today, how would you rethink your tasks? How would you rethink your business? I think you would address customer problems and even marketing problems in a very different way. I've got some examples that might help illuminate that. So looking at ChatGPT a little bit more, because that's the big headline act here, you'll have seen that Google has launched its Bard AI. They had very different approaches to the market. So Microsoft kind of had an arm's length relationship with OpenAI. A lot of companies, Google has typically done this in the past, they invest in external companies, they hold a minority stake in it, and then when that company starts taking off, they have preferable terms to take over more of it. So Microsoft has stayed close to OpenAI, but it's wanted it to be experimental and not too close to the core of their business. Google has tried to keep Bard a bit closer because it has more to lose. If this cannibalizes search, it's really, really damaging for Google because it's harder to insert ads into that sort of a system because it's unpredictable. So you'll see ChatGPT as the kind of Microsoft-backed version of this, although it has other backers. Bard coming from Google. Meta has come up with some pretty effective models as well. There aren't that many players, though, in there. And this was the big success to ChatGPT getting 1 million users in just 2 days. As you can see, I have signed up for ChatGPT Plus. It's been pretty useful in some regards, I'll be honest. And it's almost like the original Google search engine, isn't it? We have moved on so much in the last 25, 30 years, and yet this interface is the one that brings us in. It's blank. It will not do anything unless you tell it what you want it to do. And that's a great way to kickstart a tech product. So Google, they stripped out all the news links and everything that Yahoo was giving you. They just tried to give better search, which it was back then, with an empty box. Tell us what you want, and then we'll go and find it. ChatGPT has been doing something similar, just a little bit later. But a second thing, building on what I've just said to you. So I've said, we should all be trying to rethink what we do, think of different ways that we could get tasks done. The second part of that rethinking is to understand that there are two different layers that we need to see if we're going to get the most out of ChatGPT or DALL-E or OpenAI's range of APIs, actually. You have this model layer, which is under the surface, essentially, and then you have an application layer that sits above it. So the applications are, as the name suggests, ways of applying the underlying technology to new problems. So here you see things like support, so chat or email, general writing assistance. What people don't always know is that these tools, which have their own branding and call themselves, Jasper or Notion or whatever, they're actually just making calls to this bottom layer, and they're going to OpenAI's GPT-3 to get the answers. We call these API wrappers. They wrap up the information that they get from the tech layer into something that's usable. So ChatGPT does this. It's an underlying technology, right? But they make it really user-friendly. Everyone is trying to copy that same thing. I said I was bad with analogies, but I'll try this one because I think it might help. If you imagine that you have an orchestra of wonderfully trained musicians who know how to, they can hit any note in any combination, but they've never heard any tunes before. They've just been trained very specifically and very technically to the absolute utmost perfection. And then you bring in, this is DALL-E's attempt at drawing Beethoven. The way, there's only really one picture of Beethoven, so I thought I'll try and get a fresh one, but it's not really recognizably him. It's a bit Stephen Fry, isn't it? But anyway, then you bring in someone who has an idea. So he needs this tool, but it's not enough. He has to have an idea. He has to bring it to market in a way that people want to hear it. This is what all these different companies are doing. They're looking at underlying technology and thinking of new ways to apply it. And anyone can do it. That's the big news here. Apologies, the slides just going a little bit stuck, but it'll come back to me. There we go. So if we're thinking about ChatGPT on the left, you can see I've been able to go in and ask it to just create some simple code that I can use in Python to create a very simple chart that I want to show. But really what I'm doing with the tools that I'm going to show you that I've been building is I'm making calls to OpenAI. And there's a link here for a quick start that'll help you go through that. It can do anything you want, from text completion to creating brand new images for things. And you just need to create an interface that looks friendly and helps someone achieve something. So it could be as simple as, someone told me an idea the other day for creating books written in the voice of someone that has passed on. And you could auto-generate all of that if you trained it to do the right thing. A bit like Beethoven going to the orchestra and saying, right, you know all that stuff, but here's what my third symphony is going to sound like. You're going to need to up your game a little bit. And that's what they're all doing. ChatGPT Plugins just launched this week. They haven't given me access yet, which is bizarre, probably an oversight on their part. I'm probably number 15 billion in the list. These plugins are really their app store moment. And you'll see other people saying that. I haven't invented that analogy. It's a pretty obvious one, I suppose. It's them allowing companies to extend the capability of the ChatGPT interface. We'll see if that's enough, if ChatGPT itself is going to become like a brand new search engine experience that we'll all run to, or if the technology is going to be a little bit like the electricity analogy, just flowing through lots of different things, powering everything in the background. So Instacart has launched this ChatGPT Shopping Box. Get used to chatbots, because basically, ChatGPT is a chatbot. It became really popular. The technology that powers ChatGPT could do 15 billion different things, but the thing that we have seen it do is be a chatbot. So everyone is building chatbots. Expect that to last for about 6 to 12 months before we all get bored of having to deal with chatbots on every website. It's happened already in the past. These are just better ones. So you can go in and say launch, and it'll give you options, and then it'll try and auto-populate the website for you based on your preferences, which is pretty handy. Duolingo, which you might have your own thoughts on as a linguist. I have some pros and cons myself, but I generally like it. It has added this GPT-4 assistant. So it's great, really, because they've got all of their data and they're able to use that to essentially make ChatGPT specialized for their purposes. And when you go into it now, you can say something that I think is often lacking in language learning. I want to play, I'm going to the hotel. What do I need to say to check in? Or I've got an issue. How do I say to the waiter that my steak is underdone or something like that? And you can play through those little scenarios at an extra subscription cost. Always the case, isn't it? And for customer service, it's a pretty obvious thing to do. You can see here that Intercom gives an example of a bot that helps you manage your reservation. But think about it as well. This technology can generate lots of different things, right? So what some companies are starting to do is add it as a layer in their technical system so that it looks at all of the technical tickets that are being raised and it categorizes them. So some of them are issues that it can fix on its own because it can write code and then it can push that to someone who can approve it or fix it before it goes live. So it's really augmenting the capabilities of the technical team, and it can automatically reroute the tickets into different areas based on where it thinks they'll be best fixed. So that kind of idea of having a ChatGPT layer within customer service is really powerful. The customer isn't seeing it. It doesn't always have to be a chatbot, but it can fix issues on its own. And really, your imagination is the limit. So I just saw this morning, someone saying, oh, I've completely built this iOS game. I've never built anything using Swift before. GPT-4 created all of the code for me. And it doesn't look like the next Grand Theft Auto, but it's pretty impressive that it can come up with this as a starting point called Blob Dodge. No, not something I would play myself, but still pretty impressive. People with greater ideas, I think, could take it further. So now let's have a look at the marketing applications of this, because it's often the case with very exciting technologies. We've had it just generally with automation in the past, haven't we? If it feels like you can do everything, you end up a little bit paralyzed and you end up doing nothing. It's just a little bit too much choice. So I think there are a few key benefits for generative AI in marketing. Yep, speed, absolutely. We can get things done faster. Personalization. So if we know something about, say, a customer, that data can be fed into the system and it can auto-generate content that is best predicted to match them. We haven't been able to personalize in the digital age. We've said we can, but we haven't actually really done it. And that's one of the reasons. It's just so hard to create that much content. And extended creativity. This is where I think there's a lot of potential. It's a little bit trickier, but working with these systems in collaboration. So if we apply those, I think content creation is an obvious area. It's not as simple as just pressing the big button and letting it go wild on your website, but it can really help your production. Storytelling, so personalizing that journey for the user, and brainstorming, as you can see from these two fellas here. So I'll talk you through each just with a couple of examples of what I'm seeing and even what I'm hoping to see in the future. So content creation, I just jumped to, so I had to go back one. You might have seen this tool, Jasper.ai. It uses OpenAI's tools and then it applies them to marketing situations. So the underlying technology is very similar to what you're getting with ChatGPT. It's just making it look a bit different in the front end. You can go in here and it will help you with anything from writing Google Ads headlines to writing complete blog posts. It even knows different marketing frameworks and it can help you personalize for different stages of the customer journey. You can ask it to explain a concept like it would to a child. I'll admit I've actually done this with a couple of complicated things myself, which is all great if you know how to use it. Because the thing to be wary of is, as Nilay Patel, you might have heard his podcast on The Verge, that the web is about to be overrun with AI-generated content explicitly designed to game the algorithms. This is so inevitable, it barely even needs to be said. I am an optimist almost to a utopian standpoint sometimes with these things. I see so much potential, and you forget a little bit about human nature. I've been in marketing for over 13 years. I have seen numerous trends ruined. Marketing trends, in fact, ruined, and always by marketers, never by anybody else. If there's a way to game the system, they will figure out a way to do it. And if you look at all the content that you see out there, so say you go on LinkedIn and you see these really tedious, annoying posts saying, you're using ChatGPT wrong. Here's how to use it right. 10 prompts you need to slay ChatGPT. And then, oh God, I can't do the internet for one more day if this is what I have to see. But it's because they know it's what works for the algorithm. So if they can automate that content, they're going to do it until there's a penalty that comes behind it. So I actually asked, just to see how it would go, I asked ChatGPT to write a blog post about 5 ways to improve a content marketing strategy. And it goes through, it has the usual sort of blurb at the top. It's passable, I suppose. And then number 1 is understand your audience. And it's something that in particular writers have brought up to me when I've been talking about this topic is, does anybody want to read this content? And I don't think they necessarily do. It's pretty bland, it's pretty inoffensive by design, but we're not putting our customer first if we're creating this auto-generated content that we wouldn't want to read ourselves. Then it shouldn't be put out there just to try and trick a system. Now, a little bit more detail here, but that gave me an idea. So on the left-hand side here, I created a little database. I've got 4 different images for 4 different marketing personas. Marketing personas, you'll hear about them all the time. We create them. They're often a figment of our imagination. They help us to try and stay customer-centric, but we're quite broad, aren't we? We say their demographics are age whatever, their interests are X, Y, and Z. So I went in and thought I would create some of these, and there are about 40 different columns in this. It goes on and on saying who their favorite brands are, how much they spend, on and on. Behavioral data, psychographic data, social media data. I just fabricated the whole thing. And then I have a chatbot. And before I updated it to ChatTPT, it has this as its JSON object. So this is the code that gets sent to the API to bring an answer back. The user doesn't see any of this, but this is what's going on. So the user selects one of the 4 people, and then this will say, when you answer my query, answer it in the style and tone of someone fitting this profile. Your age is, and it'll go back to the database and fetch the age from the correct column for the correct user. And it goes through, say, their biggest frustration is such and such. This is the kind of brand loyalty they tend to have, and answer the query as if it's a market research survey for a luxury clothes retailer called Oat Stuff. I just made up that name. I had to tell the AI about the fake brand as well, of course. Go beyond cliches, because it was using a lot of cliches, and reveal your character. Now, the bit at the end, enter your query's value. That's the only bit that the user puts in. The rest of it is packaged up and sent. So it ends up looking a bit like this. You can say, what are you looking for when you shop for clothes? And because they've picked Marina in Liverpool, it gets this sort of an answer. You can use this tool as well. It's just free to use. Sarah has a very different profile. So it's, I want to make a statement. She prefers hats, I believe, is what I put in. But anyway, it's a very basic prototype, but you can see how this would deepen into proper market research. We could have an AI focus group that we're able to run. This guy, he's actually based on a friend of mine from Belfast, and he doesn't spend a lot on clothes. So I enjoy beer and F1. He really does. Yeah. But anyway, you get the idea with this sort of thing. But it's, if I had just shown this to people, they don't always know that it's ChatGPT that's powering this. This guy, the Parisian, the classy one. And other tools that we'll share with you here. A friend of mine with whom I've co-hosted a few webinars recently has developed about 15 different tools. And we had a question last time we ran a webinar. They were saying, how do you create these tools? I don't know how to code. And he said, well, neither do I. ChatGPT writes the code. I just have the idea. I go to it and say, in this instance, how could you take an image and a little bit of text from a website, a URL, and write an SEO tag for the image? Now, that's a laborious task that a lot of us have probably spent time doing. But all it needs then is the URLs from the website. It takes the images and it's able to read them. And then it creates something that says comfortable modern single seat sofa with light gray, etc. And then you can use that for SEO. So he has, I think, about 15 free tools on his website. But his main thing is not just helping people use these, it's telling them, like, these are just the 15 things I could think of. Go forth and think of 1,500 more. There's so many things that you could do differently. So to get started with this, I would really encourage you to take a moment and try and do this, because it was the eureka moment, I think, for me that got me to developing tools with this. And I've never really developed many tools in the past. Pick one marketing task or just one task that you do routinely every day. List out the steps that you and your team go through to complete the task, and then pick one of them and think how it could be done differently using these API calls. It can do everything from categorizing your content for you, restructuring it, taking or even generating keyword ideas or ideas for events. It can pull URLs for you and analyze the content, pretty much anything. And if you get stuck, just ask ChatGPT. That's what I'm doing pretty routinely these days. This opens the door. I think once you've done this once, your mind starts to expand a bit and you look around and see other things that you could do. But start simple. There's no point trying to do something crazy from day one. You get a little bit frustrated, ChatGPT makes mistakes and so on. This is a good way in. So my second point here is around storytelling. And I don't know that we'll ever trust, say, AI to create novels that people would really want to read. The text that they create is not imbued with the depth and the color of human experience. And that's kind of what you're hoping to connect with, isn't it? But there are some things that it can do pretty well, I think. If this looks familiar to you, then you've probably run sequential advertising on YouTube. We can say the different steps in the customer journey, and then we can just drag and drop different videos. So what we're trying to say is the first one, I just want to introduce my company. The second one, I want to move on and tell them about our new car. The third one, I want them to sign up for a test drive, and so on and so forth. There are only so many pieces of content that we can create and only so many variations really that we want to line up. But where this technology is headed, and I think pretty rapidly actually, is that it can take the data and think about the example I showed you of that data points of all the points about the customer. It can do that in real time, just like mine was doing, but much more advanced. Fetch all the information and then create content to fit that user. So if you know that someone has signed up for your newsletter and they have bought 17 products in the last year and they prefer dresses to other types of clothes, it can auto-create content that is uniquely fitted to that person and their moment in the customer journey. Now that means data management as much as anything else, keeping that all really neatly structured and tied together, but it is possible. And I'll partially prove it. I mean, I won't prove it beyond any doubt, but you can see here, I've got my little friend Auguste. You saw a little snippet from his database. I'm saying, what images would he like? So it knows who he is, what he's all about. It knows who the brand is, and it creates these kind of images. Now, you wouldn't go and use these in their current guise on a website. You would be mad to do so. But you can see at least that it's pulling in that he's a bit classier. He's looking for a blazer, all those sorts of things. So as this moves to its next iteration and the images get better, why wouldn't brands do this instead of just the usual images they use for absolutely everyone? Took a while to make that thing actually, but the results were okay. It's DALL-E's fault. It's just not advanced enough yet. Now, my third point here is around brainstorming, coming up with new ideas, new ways of thinking about problems. This one was just for a bit of fun, come up with 5 witty taglines for a beetroot festival for a class I was teaching, just wanted to show them something. Beat the odds, a rootin' tootin' celebration of all things beetroots. Maybe a little bit over the top, but paint the town red, I could see that. Beat your heart out. These are pretty good. I don't know how many beetroot festivals you've been to, but these are better than most of the ones I've seen. On a more serious note, as you can tell from the way this slide is presented, this is a really fantastic study. I've written about it via the link down below. And what this did was it took 2 groups of people, right? And it had a group of people who were just writing normal content, so emails, marketing copy, everyday content really, writing executive summaries of content for more senior leaders at the company and so on. So they were the control group. the treatment group was encouraged to use ChatGPT. And it was amazing because they tried to look at the quantity and the quality of content that they could create. And there was this sort of sweet spot where if you just used ChatGPT to create the content, it was faster, but the quality was never good. It was rated by human graders about 5 or 6 out of 10. So it's not what you would want to be passing on to anyone in a company. But if people worked well with the tech, and this is what this image is showing actually, the best combination of that, they were getting better results and at a higher quantity. And it's because some of the tasks that people are spending their time on, they maybe don't need to be spending their time on. So the control group, they were spending less time, the ones using ChatGPT, on brainstorming, less time on rough drafting. Not no time, but they were spending less time. They were asking it for suggestions, maybe amending them and so on. But then they spent a lot more time editing. That's where ChatGPT's content that isn't good enough, and I don't think will be in the next little while anyway, for us just to use it straight away, because it doesn't understand context, it's not personalizing it, it's not doing any of those things. But it was decent enough that they could edit it. So it was a little bit quicker, and the quality was just as good as the people doing it on their own. Yeah, it was a really interesting study, very early one. And I just ask it to take different approaches. I'll draft an essay or a paper or something I'm writing for publication, and I'll say, give me some feedback. And it was so overly hostile the first time that I had to say, sorry, can you be a little bit more nuanced and not just tell me I'm an absolute idiot like you did the first time? I can take criticism a little bit, not that harshly though. So then it goes through and says, actually, this is something to do with this presentation. Well, I agree with this, but it's important to note that talking to AI is different to talking to people and so on. So it can make you think a little bit more, question what you were doing, go into a bit more detail. Brainstorming will go to this stage. Actually, GPT-4, the new model, is going to be able to, once it gets fully released, take a picture like this, as in the demo, and turn it into a basic website. In the demo, in the video, sorry for the low resolution on this, but this is the way it came to me. They put my joke websites, and it puts just really lame joke 1. So it not only takes that, it inserts a really lame joke as number 1 in that as well. So it's not going to do this out of thin air, but a little prompting is going to be enough to get it moving. And if you hear from our old friend, Jeff Bezos, you've definitely heard a lot about him if you've been on LinkedIn. He famously, I don't know if this is completely true, but famously would have an empty chair in meeting rooms to say that's to remind us of the customer. Are we working in their best interests? It's a nice gimmick, I think, actually. But I've been using it for things like this. Hope Stuff, my made-up fashion brand, and Verona, their biggest rival, can go in and have a little bit of an ask about it. And it says, I'm not sure if we put off specifically, more likely to be put off by high-end brands, that tend to be aimed at a more fashionable crowd that I fit into, and so on. The content, you get the sense, it's based on this guy, this friend of mine. I'm surprised at how faithful it is, because it doesn't know him, obviously. It says, hoodies and other timeless pieces which fit well with Belfast style. Hoodies, I think, yeah, I can say this, I'm from Belfast. I think hoodies count as timeless pieces, bootcut jeans, sounds about right. But anyway, if you were to plug in all of the data about your company, which I haven't been able to do for this fictional brand, you could have an on-tap AI research group where you could have these kinds of conversations. It shows you, I think, 2 things. First, it can be pretty advanced, but second, it will do whatever you want it to. So it won't always give you the kind of truthful answer. It'll give you the answer it thinks you're looking for. And that's, given that I'm not actually launching this as a product, it's just a bit of a prototype for a laugh. I can say that with some certainty and not worry about cannibalizing my business. I don't know that you would trust it to be the voice of the customer just yet. But if you did take some real content from customers, it could mimic that style very effectively. So the impact of generative AI on work and skills, and then we'll open up to our questions. You can see those coming in, so thank you all very much. I haven't been looking at them too specifically just yet to get my thoughts together, because, well, let's be honest, I can only do one thing at once. So AI and education, it won't surprise you. We've been discussing this quite a lot. I mainly work for Columbia Business School in New York, and New York was the first state actually to ban the use of ChatGPT in its school networks. And it's a really interesting and nuanced discussion. There were people at the time when they decided to do this, just completely block access to it in early January, who likened the school networks to the Luddites, railing against the Industrial Revolution. And I guess I would be normally inclined as a tech optimist to see that as the case. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the thorniness of this issue, because we don't know just how damaging it could be if used at scale. We didn't really think about those things before we put everything onto social media and let these algorithms dictate how we view the world. We didn't really think all those things through. So a bit of caution is probably about right. Companies like OpenAI and Google are in a rush to get to market first. They see it as a land grab, first mover advantage, and so on. But from the education point of view, obviously we can't hold back the tide, and that's not what anyone is wanting to do. But some of the simplistic questions that have come through, or even points of, well, we just need to rethink education. Okay, maybe that's true and has been for a little while now, but it's not really as straightforward as all that. So there's been some great thinking about how we could, rather than going completely back to scratch, think about ways of incorporating this and having, say, ChatGPT draft an essay and have people critique it and write a better version of what it has done. As the technology improves, maybe we need to adapt again. But as I'm going to tell you, adaptability is going to be one of the foremost skills, and that agility applies to education as well. So the ethical implications are, well, I think quite myriad of people are simply going to use the tech to cheat. It's a waste of a professor's time to grade it as well. That's the one I've been trying to tell to my students. I don't know if that's what's going to persuade them, but that's what I've been telling them anyway. And of course, we are going to need to adapt to it. The challenge is we're thinking about learning impact, aren't we? That's what we care about. It's about educating people. So if we're able to educate them to the same learning objectives, to the same point, to the same kind of rounded adults we want people to be in cooperation with the tech, then it's not some sort of moral issue that would hold us back from that. The challenge is if you're not doing so much of the work, how do you learn the skill? Practical application and repetition are really important for skill mastery. You can't just hand it over to the tech. It's a bit like I mentioned airplanes. Pilots are now less equipped to manage the airplanes when the AI doesn't work anymore because they're not practicing their skills. They call it the automation paradox. And we're going to hear that come back a little bit. I think it applies to education as well. I could do a whole symposium on that, but not that anyone would attend, but I could talk about that for weeks. So I'll move on for the moment. If you remember them, they were very recent, but the kind of AI chatbots that were in the Amazon Alexa, you might still be using some of those devices. It was told to us as marketers that once they achieved 95% accuracy for voice recognition or word accuracy, that would be the threshold at which they would reach mass adoption. But they reached that point and then they continued to hover about there and they plateaued a little bit better, a little bit worse, a little bit better, and never really reached that general application point. And the more you look at the output from ChatGPT and GPT-4, the more you think we could actually be reaching a little bit of that point, not because it's not progressing anymore, but because that revolutionary moment of that parlor trick of being able to say just about anything has already passed us by. And Bill Gates comes out and says in the next 5 to 10 years, AI-driven software will finally deliver on the promise of revolutionizing the way people teach and learn. It'll know your interests, your learning style, so it can tailor content that will keep you engaged. I would actually argue that this is possible today to a large extent, actually. We haven't done it because the infrastructure isn't in place and we haven't created the right content. If you think back to the start, this AI is learning from the corpus of human knowledge that is available for it to learn from. We actually need to create better content. It depends on it to get better. It's not just going to keep getting better and better and imagining breakthroughs that we never thought of. I mean, it will imagine them, but they won't be true. So I asked ChatGPT about job displacement, and it gave me a pretty predictable answer that looks like what you would get from McKinsey or BCG or whatever. Task category, data entry and analysis, customer support, content creation, and so on. The ones most likely to be replaced by AI, data input, basic support, basic copywriting. but least likely, high-level data interpretation and strategy, complex issue resolution, conceptualization, and nuanced storytelling. So I kind of agree with. I do just think it's not as simple as the AI takes these tasks and then we simply move on to these other ones. Because if we're not doing these ones, we're actually not as well equipped to do the ones on the right-hand side. I might sound like I'm turning into one of those Luddites right before your eyes. It's not the point whatsoever. It's actually about understanding the nature of work. Work is not just about individual tasks. Some can be replaced, some can't. You can switch them out with anybody. It's a cohesive whole, isn't it? It's communicating with people. It's bringing things together, knowing the right way to get things through to different people and where not to send things at a certain time. All of those little bits of context and nuance can't just be removed or replaced by something else. So we need to be a little more thoughtful about that. I would break it down this way, actually. The AI is highly specialized. It's very, very good when it's given something to work on very specifically. Help me build this specific app. I want to make it called Dodgeball or whatever that thing was called earlier. That's what I want to make right now. Help me write that code. But people are very specific. You can look at that code or look at the product and see, that just doesn't feel quite right, or there's something just a bit off with that. So that article just doesn't read like it's been written by a human. And here's an example. A friend of mine has a company and they generate marketing images for brands. So you can see here, they're trying to work for a company. It's actually a pretty good image. That an AI can create that is really impressive, right? That is the AI image completely created on its own from a prompt that just says, create a marketing image for brand X. As you can see on the right, the brand is Chanel. What took it from point A to point B? Human input. They went back, they retrained the model, they added more detail to it, they changed the prompt that they put in, they fine-tuned the weights within the algorithm so that they could get to point B on the right-hand side. So the AI can create something that's quite good, but it's not good enough. To get to good enough, you need the human input. So I saw this just this week. We're going to see a lot of these studies. ChatGPT could disrupt 19% of US jobs. Is yours on the list? Brilliant way of getting a headline. I clicked, I put it into this presentation. Absolutely did exactly what they wanted me to do. ChatGPT probably wrote the article. ChatGPT did actually write the study, which is pretty amazing, actually. It was OpenAI research. But we can see here that poets, lyricists, and creative writers have 69% exposure to being disrupted by this technology, completely having their jobs taken by technology. It shows a lack of understanding in what makes people tick. It won't be that straightforward. It won't just come along and take everything. Would you want to read that poetry? Is that why you like to, say, read Walt Whitman or whoever else, because it's just mechanically written in a certain way? No, you want to know about the experience. You want to have that feel of that lyricism. So I'll round off with thoughts on future skills. I know it's one that a lot of people are coming in and asking about at the minute, and it's really key to think about this skill of talking to AI, working in tandem with this technology. You don't need to be an AI PhD, or at least I hope not, because I'm certainly not one myself, to get the most out of this technology. You get to almost a sense of a gut instinct about what will and won't work with it, what it's good at, what it's not so good at, where you can push forward a little bit more, where you're going to need a bit more human input. But the sense of talking to AI might be the most important skill of this century, and I would certainly agree with that. It even created this little image of a person talking to a robot for me. So people are asking, of course, will AI take my job? I think probably not. You'll see people saying someone using AI will, and it's a nice construction. I think it's probably a nice way of putting it, actually. But there'll be completely new jobs. If you look at past technological revolutions, they have displaced demand. They've shifted demand elsewhere and actually increased it in other areas. That's what we're going to see. So product managers for AI, people who know what kind of product would fit the market, how to get it ready, how to get teams to work together on it, even if they're not writing any code whatsoever. The prompt engineer, it's not just an engineer that never misses a meeting. This is someone that knows how to craft those prompts, like the ones I showed you for my little demo tool. How do you put together all of that data to be sent across to it and get the right answer back? The machine learning specialist that can debug the systems, understands how they really work. The explainable AI expert. So it is coming up with things that we didn't want to see, or it's hallucinating in different ways. What's going on? And clients will want to know that sort of thing. We need people who are able to go in and say, this is what's happening with the system, and this is how we're going to fix it. And finally, the AI consultant, someone who will go in and ask the question I started with today. How do we rethink what we're doing now that AI is finally actually with us? So the skills to think about then, the ones that I don't think AI will never encroach upon, but that it's never going to be exactly the same as people. No, our uniqueness is always going to be a strength here. So critical thinking and problem solving, 100%. These are things that we need to rethink some education about, actually, ways of developing those skills. Emotional intelligence, we still need, for example, marketing is about connecting with people. There's a person at the other end of what we're doing that we need to be thinking about here. Very hard for a robot to do that. Interpersonal and communication skills, going to be massively important. How do we talk about the findings? How do we decide what to do next with our AI systems? Adaptability and learning agility, understanding that, say, what I'm talking about today will be valid for a shelf life, let's say. I don't know exactly how long, maybe not at all, but we're going to need to be adaptable to whatever it is that comes next. And learning the skills above will help you to do that. And fifth, technical and digital literacy, knowing the difference between the application layer and the model layer, having an idea and knowing what would be the right place to put this, how would we get this to market? That kind of digital literacy and technical literacy will be increasingly important. So I'll leave you with this question and we'll move over to yours. I'll try and get through as many as I can, I promise you. Instead of just asking, how can generative AI do what I do, but cheaper and faster? Let's rethink that question. Let's reframe it rather and say, how can I rethink what I do to achieve more with this technology as my partner? I will briefly hand over to you, Aislinn.
Thank you so much, Clark. There's a lot in there I learned a lot from. I'm sure everyone else has, and there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff as well. I'm particularly interested in attending the Beetroot Festival, I have to say. It sounds very interesting. So we have a lot of questions coming into the Q&A, so we're going to try, in about 15 minutes, we'll kind of answer all of them as much as we can. Just before I do, I just want to let you guys know of a special offer we have going. So we're offering 15% off all of our courses, actually. We have over 40 courses, but particularly if you're interested in artificial intelligence for business. So it's a 12-week course that we run in the evenings. It's part-times, and the next intake is 18th of May, I believe. So we'll send this discount code and the information on the course over to you in email, as well with the slide and any links that we have as well, and the website recording as well, the webinar recording, sorry. So yeah, I think we have a load of questions to get through now, Clark. So when you are ready, so feel free to pop any questions that you have into the Q&A. As I said, we'll try our best to answer all of them as well.
Excellent, yeah. Look at that wonderful image.
Few, yeah.
Yeah. Just look at the quality, sheer quality of the image that DALL-E created for me here. Yeah. I'm thinking, yeah, great to see. Always end on a note that this isn't actually just going to start taking over the whole world. Yeah, we have a lot of really, really good questions here. I'll try and get through as many as I can in the next sort of 15 minutes. But for anything else, do just reach out to me there. I'll be happy to answer you over LinkedIn or something like that. I'll start from the top actually, because Emmett has a great question here. Emmett asked, in a marketing campaign, if you generate an image like the examples you gave, who owns the IP to this image? This is a great question because at the minute, we haven't really figured that out, Emmett. It's kind of like the Wild West. People are able to just go and use these images, and it says on OpenAI, it's your property once you've created this and you go and use it, because what they don't want is liability. They want anyone being able to come back to them. But that's not written in law. So it's just them trying to create a new policy of their own as a company. We are seeing people start suing Stable Diffusion, the image generation tool. I see people trying to sue them because people are creating images that, without the user even knowing, are based on the works by an artist who didn't consent to their work being used. So you have someone using, for promotional purposes, essentially a ripoff of the artist's work, but they never got approval and never even knew to seek it. The only people who could really be liable there is Stable Diffusion for taking the content and then using it for someone to go and use. Now, these companies never want to slow that process down because it stops their scale, that makes them automated and so on and so forth. But we'll see a lot more focus on that area. And I think some really high profile cases. As it stands, the IP laws just haven't caught up with what's going on. So people can create these images. If you look at Facebook and Google, they're both working on tools that will integrate this into their advertising platforms. So it is very much going to happen. It is going to expand. What you'll probably see is that they will have a corpus of images that they're licensed to use, and they'll use that as the basis for anything they generate for you. So it won't be crazy DALL-E style images necessarily. It'll just be, if you're Burberry, it will automatically generate Burberry style images for you in the Burberry style. And you'll be able to see what kind of images it's based on. So you're free to use the images that DALL-E creates. They want you to be free to use them so that they don't get held accountable. But I'd be wary, especially when you're mimicking someone's style, that there are questions about this, if not answers just yet. Marina, yeah, that's a quick question here, but I do want to answer this one. Is there any research on what new jobs will be needed in the next decade? Yeah, I'd be happy to share some of that. The research is obviously at an early stage, but there have been some good questions asked about it and some good, I think, studies on really what this tech is good at, what it's not so good at, and therefore where things might shift. There are a lot of assumptions built into it, but I think the genius of an answer is in the last slide I showed, where I was going through the different skills of, you know, critical thinking, and even consultancy, things like that are becoming more important. Just people who understand the technology, know how it works, and can communicate it to a mass audience becoming more important. But yeah, I'd be happy to add a few more bits into the final slide of this presentation, which I'll then share with everyone. Good question here from Robert. I'm trying to rapidly work my way through as many as possible, quite a lot. So how likely is ChatGPT to be itself disrupted by large language models such as Alpaca that can be run locally via CPUs and retrained on custom data sets? So I would say not particularly likely to be disrupted by that in terms of taking the majority of the market. However, you are correct to point out that these tools, the future for them is to be trained on each individual company's data, so that each company essentially has its own ChatGPT used for its specific purposes. So Microsoft is integrating this into Azure so that it's looking at your data in Power BI. You're not just asking ChatGPT, what's a good go-to-market strategy for, you know, a brand new seltzer drink? It can see your data, it can see what's worked for you before, it knows what the company is, and you can ask it just much more simply, we're launching a new seltzer, what should we be looking for in our data? And it will actually fetch insights from the data for you and use that. So it will be much more cohesive, it will be much more embedded, but I think retraining them on custom data sets, that's going to be the large language models themselves, as well as the locally run CPUs that are doing this. So you're definitely on the right lines and seeing into the future of where this is going. So a question, just how might a company go about launching a ChatGPT customer service bot for its website, as in your Intercom example? Well, this is really what Intercom does, is it creates the chatbots for other companies. You'll notice in the example I shared, it had Stay B&B as its example. So they can't say Airbnb, it's kind of based on that. And you can go to companies like them. I think it's a little risky at the minute to go creating your own, kind of in the way that I have with the ones that I'm using as demos. The reason I'm keeping those in a development environment is I have lots of guardrails in place to say what, you know, do and don't say these different things, but it can cause so much damage if it gets something completely wrong. It's not reliable enough to be sent out into the wild in that way. So what's happening is some companies are working direct with OpenAI, so getting their tech team to build the whole model for them so that it's much more reliable. The really massively open era of using this on every single chatbot is coming, but isn't quite there yet. So companies like Intercom are an intermediary that are helping companies to do that. You could go and build your own really, really easily. Like literally, I could do it. I'm no great developer or coder or anything like that, but I could go and build you one in an afternoon with the help of ChatGPT. I would just be wary though, because it will hallucinate a little bit, fabricate things, and if it's customer service, probably not where you want to get into just yet. But I'd keep an eye on it because it will get better. Tom asks, one of my favorite questions that I'm been talking about for a long time, to be honest, Tom. People are so enthralled to data. So the question is, are we not already in danger of being overwhelmed with data or information as compared to knowledge or understanding or insight? And it's, nominally, that's the idea with these tools, is that they're able to get us a bit closer to getting some knowledge from the data that we have. I think we can be overly optimistic on that front. I think we like the notion of having lots and lots of data. Even being overwhelmed by it almost feels good, because it feels like there's just so much data, and data is good. So lots of it must be better. If we're going to get that kind of knowledge or insight, the point that I would always raise is that these are human phenomena, aren't they? They aren't going to jump out at us from a robot. It's not literally going to say, here are 5 eureka epiphany moments for you and your specific business that only you could understand. It's just not going to happen unless we ask it the right questions and we feed it the right information. But we need to be more logical and structured thinkers to do that. And the way that we're doing it at the minute is we're actually copying and pasting prompts written by other people to put into our ChatGPT. So I think there's more of a fundamental education required there before we switch that around. But I would definitely agree with you. Yeah, it's a question that I'll probably add into the further resources. Now, other resources available, or what are your thoughts on ChatGPT in terms of data protection and or privacy, mainly within financial services? Yeah, there's been a bit of research written about that already. I mean, you can imagine where some of the challenges might lie with some of that. The finance industry will not want to miss out on all of this, but they'll want to be safety first for very, very obvious reasons. So I'll share some of the research that I've seen on that there as well. Andrew, that's a question that I'll probably write a blog post or something on soon, because it deserves a bit more thought and time. But Andrew says, gaming the system seems to be the pivotal point in all of this. Our nature is to use tools to our personal or professional advantage. Yes, you could go back to the caveman, couldn't you? With tools, that's pretty much what they're for. Could this new AI tool actually unravel the fabric of the internet without truth as a fundamental anchoring? Does everything just break down when the system accelerates? Yeah, I do wonder, Andrew. I mean, it's not like we got to grips with what we might call the previous era, the social media driven age of the internet, and we've got a firm foundation, and now we're layering this on top. We never even got to grips with that first of all, and now we're jumping into something else straight away. Any notion of truth is very subjective. My challenge with some of this is that, and I would have liked to get into it a little bit more today, actually, is that if we follow the line of thought that it's just doing what it needs to bluff it, to get a pat on the head from the user, then it's going to tell us convincing and often quite seductive lies about things, because it's just trying to get us to say, good job, essentially. Now, if we see it as a source of truth, so if people think it's because it's robotic, because it's lots of data, we tend to think it's objective. If we then screenshot that and post it on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, those algorithms are set up for engagement. And what engages people? Well, a nice sounding lie tends to do it quite often, doesn't it? And if it comes from a source like ChatGPT, it'll maybe take off a bit more. It can personalize the content to a much greater level. So of course you end up with everyone just having their own sense of truth. We thought we had that with things like Twitter. I think it's going to look like child's play when you get to this stage. Now, there are a lot of people who know this and who are asking these questions and are trying to be very firm about this. Because we've seen the damage to political systems as well, there's an onus on trying to get it right. But we're still enthralled to where the money goes, and the big companies want to push ahead with this. So it's really, it's a great line of questioning. I'd love to see a bit more research on. I'd also like to see a bit of action, actually slowing down the pace of progress to get this right. Wouldn't be a bad way. It wouldn't be a bad use of everyone's time. Valentinas, great question. Copywriting is a big reason why many people will use ChatGPT. And I mean, I can be all highfalutin about this and say you shouldn't do it because the quality, it doesn't show enough respect to the user and so on. I know enough about people to know that they're still going to do it, right? So Valentinas asks, how can people know that the content shared is generated by ChatGPT? So they actually have done something that won't be a long-term solution, but it's quite clever. They've inserted a little watermark into the content, and there are tools that can help you detect whether an article, you can just Google these and they'll show up. You can insert a piece of text and it will predict the likelihood that it was written by ChatGPT. Because of course there are patterns in how it works and it can detect those. It'll be a cat and mouse game over time, obviously, but at the moment there are actually ways to detect it. So if you've got to say an agency writing your content, you can check if it's been written by ChatGPT or not. I've seen some people doing that actually. Yeah, so like the view that personalization was hard in the past, not anymore. Any examples from big tech companies like Amazon who are already using AI to deliver personalization to another level, right? So I have a friend who's working on a system that is designed essentially to do this. As you land on an e-commerce page, the analogy he used to me actually to take it back a bit was, so he and I would be very different stylistically. We both went to the same school, went to the same university, and went very different directions. He lives in San Francisco, and he said, look, if you and I walked into the same menswear store, the store clerk would treat us very differently because they would look at us, so they would think about what they have in stock, and they'd show you towards this sort of thing, show me towards that sort of thing. They'd personalize their tone, the way they communicate with us. But if you and I went onto the website, we just see the exact same thing. So he, much cleverer than I am and much better at this sort of thing, he is creating a tool that will inject a new layer so that when you land on a website, it goes and fetches all the information about you and then auto creates the product descriptions and even decides which order to show the product images in and all that sort of thing. If you're Amazon, it's pretty tricky here because they're, like every business in history, they've got a huge advantage and they don't want to give it away until they have to. What they'll likely do is buy a company, could end up being his, actually, someone like that, and then integrate this technology in there. But at the moment, their profit margins are so good, not necessarily on retail, but as a whole, that they'll want to keep things as they are. So they'll be investing, they'll be trialing, and they'll only move when they have to. Look at the smaller players though, because they are doing really interesting things here. We have questions about plagiarism as well. We've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll through a sort of different range of things. Fred has a link to download ChatGPT. You actually don't even need to download it, Fred. If you just search for OpenAI or ChatGPT, it'll take you straight through, and it's web-based, so you can use it. Yeah, another question: how do I get started? Yeah, just literally just Google ChatGPT. It'll show up, and is it free? There is a free version, but it's not as reliable. But yeah. And so yeah, maybe I could just ask, if you don't get to my question, I could just ask ChatGPT. It'll probably give you a better answer, Anda, if I'm being completely honest, but I'll try my best. So where do you start with kids, say 8 to 12 years, and then 13 to 18 years to get them engaging with and harnessing the opportunities generative AI presents? Yeah, it's a great question, Anda, and I've spoken to colleagues who say this is the most common question they're getting, especially in executive education classes. People are thinking, what should my kids be learning? How do I give them a bit of an advantage and get them ready for the future? And what we're starting to see is new companies, my own being one of them, to be completely honest, trying to teach these new ways of thinking. They're actually old ways of thinking, aren't they? Going back to understanding the logic of things like mathematics, as much as the computations, the inner workings of these kinds of systems, how to engage critically, how to assess different types of content, to look at different sources, to synthesize those into a view that isn't easily taken in by things, that's able to be of better judgment, I suppose. So at the age that I've been looking at more is kind of teens, and when people are in high school, how to teach them to work with these kinds of systems and understand the technical literacy and the data literacy that they're going to need to work with them. It's not so much about the hands-on, but it is about knowing the theory behind it. And I just think you can't do one without the other. So we're trying to use technology to build these situations. You might have seen, so a colleague of mine used to work for a company called, I think they're called Synthesia. It was started by Tesla. And like all these things, it was because Elon Musk went to his kids' primary school review and he didn't like what the teachers said. He thought, why are they teaching them to think this way? This isn't the future. So he told one of his engineers at Tesla, to go and think of a new education system. It's actually really interesting what they do. And it is about trying to teach kids collaboration, communication skills, critical thinking, data literacy. They've got a whole kind of curriculum that goes alongside it. It's maybe a bit too experimental. It wouldn't go into the mainstream, but I think we'll see something of a blend of the two in the future. Actually, if you check on my LinkedIn, I've been writing about this topic a lot recently, probably a little more cogently than I just have been there. So
Thank you, Clark. I'm conscious that we're probably running out of time now as well. There's a lot more questions that are still unanswered. So as Clark says, you want to reach out on LinkedIn. Recently enough, Clark also wrote an article for us on ChatGPT, which you can find on our own LinkedIn page, UCD Professional Academy, and that's a really informative piece as well. And additionally, there's a lot of interest in this. It's obviously going to come into our own businesses at some point. So we do have that course, Artificial Intelligence for Business Diploma. It's a 12-week course. So for anyone that wants to implement this into their own business, please do go check that out. That's the code on the screen there. But we'll follow up with an email with all these resources today, the slides, the recording, the discount code, and additional links and everything that Clark mentioned. Thank you all. Thank you so much for giving up your lunchtime to be with us today. We could probably talk about this for another 3 or 4 hours. And also Clark, thank you so much as well for giving us your time today as well.
Thanks everyone. Speak soon.
Bye guys.